So I wanted to talk to you guys today about activation exercises. So when we are getting ready to perform any kind of an exercise, I would highly encourage you guys to actually start with some activation exercises to prepare yourself for the workout that you're about to do. So yes, you start with a warm up. Yes, that is part of it, and just getting your muscles loose, increasing the temperature of the muscles to help prevent injuries from being able to happen. But then as we start to actually prepare for lifting of some sort, what I want you to think about is priming the body to be ready to handle the weight that you're about to give to it. So, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that there are certain core places in our body that are underutilized, but are essential for proper technique and to prevent injuries. One of those particular areas happens to be the glute muscles, right? So, what I want you to think of is if you look at physiology, there's a little terminology that says neurons that fire together wire together. And essentially, what that means is the synchronicity of neurons firing helps to create pathways so that it's remembered more in the future, so it can call on it more quickly in the future. So, what that means is that we want to focus on, especially the glutes when we're doing lower body workouts, to be able to fire the neurons appropriately so that now when we go to actually performing more intense activity with like more complexity and having more weight behind it, that the glutes are going to continue to fire first to help us to build proper strength, to help us with proper form, and then also to be able to take the load of whatever weight we're going to put on it and prevent injuries from occurring, right? So, things that we can do to activate these glute muscles prior to when we're about to do a lower body workout that will involve other portions of the lower extremities. One would be the example of clam shells, one of my personal favorite exercises that we have, but a lot of times it's done incorrectly. So, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we can actually do to make sure we are performing this correctly in order to make it so that it'll fire correctly when we start to actually put weight onto things like our squats or our deadlifts. So you're going to lay down on the ground and you're going to have on your side and have your hips and your knees pretty much in a in a 90-degree angle. Then what I want you to do is make sure your top hip is rotated over the bottom hip so that you actually have the hip that's on the top is slightly more in front of, slightly more anterior than what you would see on the other side that's actually on the ground itself. The purpose in what we're doing this for is we don't want our hips to open. We want to focus on the glutes in themselves. If we open up our hips, we are anatomically just opening up our bodies and we're doing it through the bones and the joint angles as compared to actually using the musculature of the glutes to do this. So making sure that top hip is rolled over the top. The first thing that we'll do is with our knees and our legs and our ankles all together, we're going to lift up the ankle into a slight elevated position, and we're going to now externally rotate our leg so that it's in an upright position. I want you to think slow and controlled, not fast and speedy, slow and controlled. You could even put your hand back on your glutes to feel it firing in that. We're going to lift it up for as far as your rotation can go. It's okay if it's not hard, if it's not very far, and then put it back into that resting position and then return the ankle back to the resting position as well. And then keep repeating this over and over again. Now, the nice thing is we can actually use resistance loops to offer a little bit of resistance. Now, when we're going for this, we want to go to the strengths of what your external rotation is for your particular hips, and it's okay if it's not as far as you want. What we don't want to have happen is actually have that hip opening up by it falling backward so that you are no longer using your musculature and instead are just opening your hips by rotating your entire trunk. So make sure always that that hip is in, that top hip is out in front. The second exercise that we can do is called a fire hydrant. Fire hydrant works similarly, except that we are going to have a little bit of extension in our hip as well. So in the fire hydrant position, you are on all fours. What I want you to do is to slightly extend your hip so on one of the sides, and you are then going to externally rotate from that position. It's same, slow and controlled as what we had, but we're starting in a slightly more extended, in hip extension as you're performing this. And it almost, they call it fire hydrant because it looks as if you were a dog peeing on a fire hydrant. But what you can see is the leg comes back into that extension of the hip extension. Then you externally rotate just until where you can reach your joints without actually becoming unstable in the hips and rocking the hips. You want your hips to stay stable the whole time as you are externally rotating, and not making sure that when you're doing that, you're not dropping your hips. Returning back. Now you can do this first starting out with without resistance loops, just like you could with the clam shells, but then you're going to move to actually using resistance loops, starting small and only go to where that your hip extension or your hip external rotation is. The third exercise that I'd like you to consider are the glute bridges. Now, with glute bridges, there's a couple of things I want you to keep in mind. One, they can become kind of difficult and stressful on your knees themselves. The closer your heels are to your glutes, the less stress there will be on your knees. So if you're feeling it in your knees, it means that your heels are not close enough to your glutes. So make it so that there's more of an exaggerated flexion of the knee. Now, this move starts with the abdomen. I want you to contract your core first before you pull your hips up. So it's a contraction of the core first, it's a bracing of the core, and then you can push on your heels in order to lift those glutes up, hold it there, and then drop it back down. Slow and steady is what builds those neural connections, and it also builds strength. So think of it as slow as you can to go, not fast. Fast is not impressive. It just means that you're cheating your way through the exercise itself. And this is true for almost all exercises. The slower you go, the more neural connections you are forming and the more strength that you are forming. So lift those up, hold them for a count of whatever you can do. 3 would be excellent. And then drop it back down again and repeat. Now, when you're doing this with the clam shells and the fire hydrants, I would start off with at least a set of 10 to 12, if not 2 sets of 10 to 12 for each of those exercises, and on each leg. And then with our glute bridges, another 10 to 12 repetitions, potentially with a 1 to 2 sets of it. What this is doing now is it's firing your glutes, getting them ready for the activity, so that now when you start involving other muscles in the activity as well, whatever you're doing with your weightlifting, getting your hamstrings and getting your quads worked, as well as what you can see in the legs, then what's happening is your glutes are firing first, which will help to build better technique, better strength, and less injuries.